Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the OVO Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chairman of the committee, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. We're being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely. Some officers this time, because of the strike, will be joining us via Microsoft Teams, rather exceptionally. I'd like to welcome everyone here in Committee Room 1 and everyone watching on YouTube. Please could everyone make sure that they've got their mobiles on silent, they switched off. I read this and just did my own, so I'm no better than anybody else. I think it would be appropriate though for us as usual to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the event.
Thank you.
We've had apologies for absence from Tim Bennett, Porter Baxter, and Lee Acton. Have we had any other apologies?
Thanks for the panel.
Do any members have any interest to declare? Nick, the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated, and our signing is a correct record. Yeah. Okay, now we did have the Earls Court call for action as the first item on our agenda, but the Earls Court councillors are stuck, presumably in the traffic. So I suggest that we alter the agenda order. And what I'd really like to do is to liberate as many councillors and officers. I can't work out which is the most efficient to run first to liberate the most people. So I'm just going to go with the second item, which is the social investment strategy now. So if any him or any of you want to come to the table, can I invite you to
Michael's on the screen. Want me to come and sit by?
Extra social investment. That's sorry, is a good idea.
Michael is much better.
Michael is remote, but
Michael is remote, but he is.
So if one of you wants to give us a minute, I know the committee is brimming with questions.
Okay, well, I will be very brief. By introduction, we have Anna, who's for social investment, and very much an architect of what we're looking at tonight, which is Michael Blake, who's on the screen. So effectively, I mean, what we're seeking to do here is provide you with a bit of an outline of a soon-to-be a new policy, which we will obviously bring forward for leadership in July later this year. So very much welcome our comments. I was really just going to start with two quotes from a document that is not within the report, but this is a draft of outline draft as we're starting to draft our policy. And that is, first of all, what social investment is. Social investment describes an approach where the council seeks to make the greatest possible use of assets and resources to improve the prosperity and well-being of residents by striking the right balance between non-financial outcomes and financial returns. And then the second quote is really just to talk about the aims. And the aim of the strategy is to provide a strategic direction and decision-making on the use of property assets, procurement and investment to ensure that community benefit, social value and public interest are prioritised. I'd just like to finish up by saying that obviously very much at the heart of social investment was born out of our approach to our corporate property, but social investment is really a lot more than that. And that's outlined within the report There are various other aspects. It cuts across all of the council. It's not just property, it's also procurement, housing, libraries, parks, partnerships with our voluntary organisations and charities that we work with. And there's some very good examples in the appendix report of some of the initial projects that we've done so far. So I'm happy to read it there.
Thank you, Michael. And I want to add anything before we kick off with questions.
Just one point, Michael may well come in. One of the approaches we wanted to take to social investment was not to wait until a strategy was published. We've been working in the background, and the examples project progress to date is in section 4 of the report. This is an innovative new approach. So we're not saying that everything is going to be successful. With innovation, you try and succeed or you try and fail and you learn from it. And that's a really important part of what we wanted to do.
Thank you. And Michael, did you want to add anything, or can we go straight to question?
Just to follow up on Kim and Anna's comments, that at the core of this is about increasing the prosperity and well-being of our residents, and ensuring that us as a council are always geared towards being the best council that we possibly can be, in line with council plan priorities. So all of those pilots are geared towards finding a way to better embed our residents, and thinking about aspects that are also going to improve their lifestyles, their activities, and closer partnerships with our VCSs and organisations as well. So very much to echo many of the things that Kim and Anna have already said.
Very much, that's helpful. Right, can I start with you, Walla?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a question and a half. The big question is engagement. Can you tell me about how did you carry out your engagement, and the outcome, and why you had so much emphasis on the north rather than the...
I'm going to ask Michael.
Michael, would you like to respond to that, please?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So one of the things that we wanted to ensure within this strategy is that it was co-designed with residents and with internal and external colleagues, that it was going to impact. And what I mean by the term co-designed is that in line with our Charter for Public Participation, that our residents and internal colleagues and other organisations will have a part to play in the themes, the outputs that this was set. So we worked with an organisation by the name of Ideas Alliance, who are the best practice leader in that approach. And for 4 months, they went out in and around the borough, doing different activities, from pop-up stations to online consultations to directly meeting the organisations as well, and spending time in the places that they are, to be able to get their views on what social investment could be, the areas that they would like it to focus on, and some of the things in particular that were already happening and being done well in the borough, but we could augment as part of our strategy or approach, or also improve. So the first part of that engagement was around what we called key anchor organisations. So our large VCSs, our landowners, our internal colleagues that work on some of the areas that we're talking about. And from that, the organisation then spread that out to some of the people that they work with, smaller grassroots organisations that were also then spoken to. And then there were pop-up stations around that as well. So that was turning up in estates around the borough, community centres, libraries, areas that we knew that residents would be, to speak to them, to get their views on things that are already happening in the borough and areas that could be improved. And then there was a final phase around using an online tool called Polis, which took some statements based on previous statements that had been made and asked individuals to then kind of agree based on these statements. So it might be something along the lines of jobs and employment are very important to me, and different people were able to vote, to be able to apply, almost awaiting to the number of things on that. So I think for us, it was really key, not just from a charter perspective, to have such a deep dive into engagement, but also because this is something that when it is launched, when it's live, we want to be able to give equity to our residents and our communities, that this is something that is directly geared towards changing their lives and bettering our community and council. And in some of these projects, particularly on the partnership arm, we're quite conscious of the fact that we want there to be a shared relationship and making sure that everybody comes to the table in a shared sense of power, that will allow for us to ensure for long-term success. So in quite a few of the cases, in some of our engagement, we're already thinking about projects that are already happening successfully on the ground, be it a VCS organisation or some of the landowners or some of our larger partners, that we can work with them to continue this. But also thinking about some of the case studies that we've already shown, maybe using some of the best practice of some of the pilots and thinking about how we could push that forward. So I think it was really, really important for us in terms of the strategy.
I think Catherine just raised the question of it all looks rather concentrated in the north, and there aren't actually any, in terms of numbers of residents consulted, it looks quite low.
Yeah.
Is that a fair comment?
No, so in terms of the north interaction, that wasn't the case. So we did have the organisation turn up in some boroughs in the south of the borough as well. They also spoke to quite a few VCSs in the south of the borough. They also spoke to the major landowner in the south of the borough as well, to ask them about how we did that. And then in terms of the engagement, the numbers were low in terms of what you might see of our overall numbers from the digital platform and Polis, but the organisation did spend a long amount of time. So the number that you're seeing is probably a reflection of the Polis data, which was a digital tool, but a lot of time was spent in the south of the borough in terms of engagement with organisations and VCSs in particular, and also with residents too.
Do you want to follow up on that? And then I'll.
I still feel I'm not satisfied that there has been. I mean, it seems like there is a lot of engagement with landowners, organizations, as opposed to residents themselves, and that's where my question is.
Yeah, so that's fine. There was significantly more resident engagement. So to give a bit more of a deep dive, the organisation also turned up at our council plan engagement activities as well in the town hall, as well as turning up at places that we knew that residents would be, that they frequent. And the main reason that being is that we wanted to go to places that they felt comfortable in, as opposed to it being a request for them to come to the town hall in particular. So a lot of, although you might see it as them turning up at a particular organisation's base, the idea was that they would interact with the residents or the communities that turn up there. So just as a kind of a live example, they spent time at the Tabernacle with the aim of being able to engage with the Afro-Caribbean community. They spent time at Almanar to be able to engage with that community as well and making them feel comfortable, as opposed to it being maybe a call out for individuals to come to the town hall. So most of those organisations, it was thinking about who they were going to engage with, the residents, as opposed to kind of the organisations themselves.
Did you want to follow up on that? And then, sorry,
I was going to say, so you use the organizations to engage with the residents, but it is not very clear on the document. I think it's not doing you justice. It needs to be very clear that you use the organizations to constantly across the residents and actual numbers.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kasim, do you want to follow up?
Thank you very much. In terms of that, I understand your point, and I think just to follow up before I come to my own question, in terms of consulting with councillors, ward councillors, whether it's the south or the north, it's an important factor. And I think that's what's missing in terms of my input, if I were to do in North Kensington or in my ward, the Ghana ward, and I think that's also something to be referred to. But if I go to the page 28, paragraph 3.2, the definition of specifically talking about social investment and to define what it is, I think we can always have a good document, but shouldn't speak louder than words. What I have seen, social investment and the support for local organizations that really give back to the local community. And again, we've talked about the leadership of this council, talked about this to be a fairer council, but what I have seen on the ground is far from fairer, to be fair to all organizations. I won't, obviously, it's not the protocol to speak about any specific issues of one issue or one or two, but in general, I understand, and I want to understand from the leadership, now the current leader, the deputy leader sitting right here at this scrutiny meeting, why is there preference for some organizations and others who would really do well? For example, in my ward, when they are in need of to be given a chance for social investment properties or to operate from, rather than operating from 3 different or 4 different properties, Whereas newcomers have just been offered out of nowhere. For example, in my own ward, without mentioning names, charity that's doing a fantastic work and has been doing it for nearly 20 years, or more than that, actually, nearly 30 years. I've been told, take it or leave it. This is empty property, it's a council property. You have to pay X amount of money, whether you want it or not. And the property has not been in use. And I would like to know why some organizations have been favored and others have been told, take it or leave it. Criteria, absolutely. And the reason of choosing.
Should we let Kim answer that?
Please.
Well, I mean, first of all, I disagree with what you're saying. We don't give any favour to anybody. In terms of, it is, I think the important thing to say that with social investment, that it's not a land grab. I mean, what we're not saying to people is here, listen, come up with whoever wants a space, we'll give you a space on a social investment list. And I think we have to recognise that the housing directorate has got a requirement for us to deliver a 2 million saving because of budget pressures. And we're doing that by ensuring that we maximise the income that we get from our property portfolio. And so it's a very difficult balance between, where we can rentalise and get a rental income, or where we should be giving a discount in terms of a road is concerned. As I say, that is one of the most difficult things, I think, within this paper. And it's what we're seeking to have comments and suggestions to how you might square that inequality as you perceive it to be, before it comes into our final iteration as far as the project is concerned. What's tended to happen is that, first of all, is that what Michael has very much been doing is going out to our existing organisations and talking to them to see what capacity there might be within our existing organisations, rather than having satisfying demands of organisations. And I think I know the one you're referring to, which are very good organisations, yes, but we have to balance that, as I say, with our requirement to generate money or other issues as far as the property is concerned.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
A quick follow-up, and then I'll come to Greg, and then Lucy, and then Doug.
Would you be prepared, and senior officers be prepared to share with me the criteria of choosing the organizations? Because we know how the organizations are operating in the borough, or let's say in South, when it comes to Johnson Riverside. Would you be prepared to meet with us and talk to us the strategy of the criteria of choosing the organization? Because we feel this has not been done properly.
Well, I think you're asking the wrong person. Because no, you're asking the wrong person, because what you're talking about is a community. If it's a community activity, first and foremost, it should be the lead member for communities who would commission the work as far as that, the need for that for the council. They would then come back to us and say, look, we have got this need, use proper, do you have space available? So that's the process. I think we are just a commissioning as far as our social investment is concerned. We're just going to do the mechanics of the renting and the lease agreements. But the lease agreements, again, should very much reflect the outcomes of the organisation themselves. So I think I very much welcome all councillors to put forward suggestions where they consider it to be a worthwhile project, through to either adult social care, if it's an adult social care product, or to communities if it's a community-related project, which I think is the one you were referring to, and they would then come and talk to us.
Well, correction. I'm not saying chair. Sorry, it's not the community. I'm talking to the lead member.
No, but I don't make that.
And I know.
I'm just saying I don't make that decision. So if somebody came to me and said, we want to have space to run a community activity, my first thing I would do is put it straight back down to our community team for them to evaluate whether or not that is worthwhile or not. Because the choice for us is really simple. Do we get a rental figure and use that to apply that in terms of commissioning services or effectively funding the council? Or do we give that as far as a community activity? And that's a decision that can be
taking the second lot of questions, which I suspect is.
Thank you, Mary. Could I just start by saying I agree with what the paper as written doesn't give me the assurance I was looking for, that the consultation, resident involvement is represented in the borough as a whole. Reading the paper, it does look very narrowly focused on the W11 postcode. That might not be true, but it's what comes out of the paper as it currently is. But my question is for Kim, picking up on some of the points Kim was making a few moments ago, and it's about the opportunity cost of this. And I'm just wondering how much income we're prepared to sacrifice as a borough for benefits in kind for good works. So is there a figure on it yet? What are your thoughts? Because ultimately it is a numbers politics, a political choice. So we start again, I know Anna wants to
I'm going to duck that question by saying that as far as the policy is concerned, when it comes through for July, we need to quantify what the budget is, so to speak. But we're not in that position yet.
So you've got to, let me come back on that before Anna jumps in. So you've got a timeline for making that sort of judgment?
Yeah, I think we have to set again, I don't want to sort of preface what's going to come into the final paper, but I think we have to set ourselves a limit on each year as to what we can make available in terms of discount to our normal commercial rent. Otherwise, we'll find ourselves running awry, from the budget, which I've already indicated is going to be quite tight.
And do you think that will be an annual decision?
I think it would probably most likely be an annual decision. I think it's quite difficult to crystal ball beyond a year on the basis of this. And we can turn the gas up and down.
Well, jumping.
Sorry, we have a tool available to us which we're using now called and it calculates social value. So it actually is a metric so that we can actually assess the value that comes out. So one example is we could look at commercial rent for the first year, and then if they achieve the outputs that they say they're going to achieve, then we can look to reduce the rent for the next financial year. If it's not a commercial property, we can look at the social value that an organisation will provide and look at and assess how that may match or exceed what a commercial market rent for a property would be. But as Tim noted, it's definitely, we don't want to get into the realms of this is a figure for a year, because each project is unique and each project will have, or each opportunity will have different values and outputs that it will derive for the community. It could be employment, it could be training, it could be nursery, it could be community events. And so we are trying not to be so prescriptive that it actually limits the opportunity and the amount of opportunities that can participate in social investment, but we recognise a need to actually track the metrics so that we actually can evaluate the outputs of this. It is a work in progress.
Actually, Emma's made a really good point, because I was actually talking about pound notes, in terms of rental. If we've got something that's got a commercial value of X thousand pounds, that's really where I'm saying is the impact as far as budget. What Anna's talking about, which is absolutely right, is that social value is a lot more than monetary value in terms of other outcomes, in terms of employment, in terms of when looking at granting a social value lease. And I think we need to just make that. Just to elaborate.
Coming on supplementary though, because it might help you.
Yeah.
I mean, you're clearly comparing pound notes on the rent with
Notional pound.
Notional pound notes, yes.
And that's quite difficult. I mean, on putting a figure on social value.
Can I?
Michael, do you want to come in?
I'm going to bring Michael in, but I just wanted to start.
Pound notes versus
Responses, everything.
The building lives, before Michael comes in, the Building Lives Academy was a commercial property, and the lease for that, the commercial value of the lease was, I think, about £25,000 per annum. But the social value calculated through a nationally approved toolkit was around 138,000 through that. So there is a toolkit.
Residents attended, as far as I know. So,
Yes, and there is into balance. Michael, are you able to give a brief answer?
Yes, and there's also a consideration around the saving to the council in some of these activities as well. So because these activities are geared towards council priorities, in some of the cases that we're talking about here, that social value, as well as the figure kind of calculation that Tom's framework allows for, there's also the consideration around if the outputs allow us to create more impact and value in our communities, that therefore then has an impact on council activities and communities, and therefore allows us to do more. So in the case of the Building Lives Academy, that was a construction-based work academy provided to our construction partner to run, that they put all of the investment into, that we provided them the space for, and that went down all the way to the desks, to the training, to the CCS cards, to the people within our borough being on site. which then results in employment for them as well. And then, of course, is an addition to our own employment activities that we have as a council. So there's almost three levels to it. There's the kind of conversation that I'm seeing have been had here around the commercial rent. Then there's the social value figure based off those activities, which is around the TOMS framework, which is the themes, outputs, and measurements framework. And then there's also that consideration from our point of view, which is the savings to us as a borough and the impact that is had from some of those activities that would otherwise not be happening without those social value, social investment leases as well. And I think that third point is also quite important in some of our other areas that aren't just geared towards property, as Kim's touched on. This is an overarching thing. So there are areas where we can think about the benefits to our employment opportunities, of adult social care, aspects of housing, other areas that are affecting our residents on a day-to-day. If we can think about how we can have a better impact through these programs, leases, partnerships, that's also a nominal save there too.
Thank you. Lucy, then Darla.
My main question's been answered, but I was just going to say, in terms of communication to engagement and getting direct engagement from residents, I don't know if it's a case of or how you approach residents this time around, or if it was just the organisation and whether next time.
There's a bit in phase 2 about pop-ups, but they appear to be all in the idea stations. They appear to be all in the north.
There was a number of so Ideas Alliance they kind of located themselves at various areas, and I think we will provide information after committee on locations of that, because there were across the borough, with deck chairs, palm trees, etc. So we were attracting people in to talk to us rather than going, if you want to talk to us, you need to come to this place at this time. We tried to be present where they were coming to and make it more of an activity. With distractions for children, so the adults could come and talk to us while the children were occupied as well. That was really.
I'm sure the palm trees swung it.
Yeah.
Very important. I suggest flamingos next time.
I know.
Yes, please. Darla.
Thank you, Chair. Michael mentioned that is, engagement and follow-up that. And Michael mentioned that, he met people once they are engaged in Almunar and also Tabanaka. So there is people who are ethnic minorities, they have language and cultural barriers, and they don't go these areas maybe. And there is other voluntary organizations who work with the grassroots. How do you engage with this? Do you engage, or how do you engage?
Who's going to pick that one up?
I'm going to offer that to Michael.
My question is to Michael.
It's how do we engage with more grassroots organisation and those where English is maybe not their first language.
Yeah, so it was one of the challenges that we put to them, and that's why that first phase where they had those conversations with those organisations that work directly with them was really important. So in quite a few of those cases, if it was an organisation, for example, that worked with a community that it wasn't their first language, they were in their space to be able to kind of make them comfortable, because I entirely agree with your point, Councillor. There are places that people might necessarily want to go to, but to make it easy for them to be able to translate, speak in their mother tongue or whatever else. So there were one or two organisations that well, more than that actually, that were really geared towards exactly what you're talking about. Be that young people who don't necessarily interact with us, be that in particular some of our refugee community and our asylum seeking community, that we knew that there were organisations that had far better relationships with the people on the ground than being quite frankly honest that we do as a council, and we wanted to make sure that they could feel comfortable and give that feedback, and also explain to them kind of what we were getting at. So there were cases of that. It wasn't always that when they went to a pop-up station, someone whose first language wasn't English, they had someone there that needed to translate. Some of those organisations were selected to be able to support on that engagement and allow those people to use their mother tongue or be in a place that they feel comfortable in.
Thank you very much. Will?
Yes, I'm come at the end, because I can summarise it. First of all, can I ask that to the minutes or separately, there's attached a short note of what Kim said at the beginning, because my main question tonight is what is social investment? And Kim started with a very good definition of that, so please, if you could have that, be great. Secondly, I'd like to support Waller, Idris and others who mentioned the apparent lack of consultation across the borough. And a few that come to mind: Exworth, Sutton, Elm Park Gardens. Hortensia Road, including bereaved survivors who've been relocated there, have relocated themselves there, including Brett Brazers, who are now living there. World's End Estate, Denia, and the big one we're talking about later in the meeting, one of the deprived areas and problem areas in boroughs is Earls Court, call for action. There's no mention of any of these in this paper whatsoever. So I know there's work going on there, but it's not in the paper. The other thing that I think is not mentioned in the paper is the work that I understand you're doing is investing to reduce demand for services. This is not investing to save, but investing to then reduce the demand for services. So you're trying to keep people in their current accommodation, be it in the private rental sector, in the housing association, or even in Sarawak. My question is how you can take, maybe this will come in the paper the later paper, how can you take this and do it at scale? Because this is very small scale examples. It's a lot of wish lists, but very little in terms of quantum. And how that scale can be sustainable, and how we can have KPIs to measure as we progress. And perhaps we do need to have vision over 3 years in the future, even if it's corrected and remeasured or recalibrated every year, because in areas, social investment in areas such as Salesforce won't be worth it if you do it in 1 year. It's got to be there for several years with a strategic plan. So my question is, how can you make it sustainable and scalable?
And I think those are incredibly useful suggestions. One of the things we know is that Michael and his team are holding the line on social investment across the organisation. So Michael is not the person who will be delivering the projects. And to get the scale we need and to get the breadth across the borough and across services, we need all other services to come to us rather than us pushing on them all the time. And I think this is part of the innovation of the approach that we're taking, because we've got a lot of support from housing, we've got support from procurement, but we need to get some legs on the work that we're doing with libraries. We need to work with Gareth and his team on adult social care. And we just had a conversation about use of property for adults, because there's quite a lot around children's, but where's the adults, so that we can reduce pressure on those services. And I think I really like the idea of a 3-year plan to go in the strategy, because we are trying to develop metrics and KPIs so that we can always track and monitor the progress, because you're right, at the end of every year, we need to see what we've achieved so that we're able to adjust and change as we go forward. So I think it's to take those points away and actually to build them in to the actual final strategy, so that we have that ability to look back at where we said we were going to be and check if we are there, and if we're not, why aren't we, so that we can change things going forward.
Great supplementaries, please, as you mentioned, young and old people, please don't forget those who are as young as Notch 11, those who are as old as I am 11.
Can I just make one quick comment, just in terms of the scaling? First of all, I mean, Anna's very grandly referring to Michael and his team. I mean, Michael.
It's Michael and Molly.
So I just really wanted to give credit to Michael on taking us on this journey, because Michael and his team have only actually been working less than two years. And I think the important point of this is it's not just about the space that we have and who might use the space. It's the work that Michael's doing with the existing organisations, of making people aware in terms of what social value is and how they can enhance their own social value. But also the other thing it's doing is that we have a lot of people already, organisations that are already operating within our space. And there we're looking to put those outcomes and that social value within the lease, so we can actually measure objectively in terms of what the outputs of those organisations, which is an important point. I think in terms of scaling, yes, I mean, we will scale up over time, but I smile when I think of the budget of the battle we had, Michael, when getting a budget for your team from the council, but I'm pleased that we have you and we've got the budget. So.
Well, thank you very much. If I could just do a quick sum up. In this, you can see that this committee thinks this paper is very important.
Yeah.
And in post-Grenfell, it's a really, really important paper for us as a council and for how we do things. I think you've heard from the committee comments on the, if not the consultation itself, then the way you've articulated it in this paper. And I think there's a particular feeling that maybe too many organisations and not enough individual residents have been consulted, and we'd like to see some firm numbers. I think possibly what we were expecting at this stage in a paper was a bit more of the knotty political questions that are involved in the social value strategy. There are things that Greg mentioned, like an opportunity cost, I raised the question of, the building, whatever thing was marvellous, but as far as I know, and I visited it, almost no residents attended it. So is that social value for this borough?
Yeah.
And I think those questions need to be asked and answered in the paper. And actually, they should have been at least posed in this paper, eccentrically numbered as it is, I might add, should be raised in here, because we as a committee, part of the point of us seeing these things early is to have an input into them. And actually, this paper doesn't give us much to get our teeth into. It doesn't raise those questions. So I think we'd certainly like to be able to be involved in it again before it gets to the stage where it's a done deal.
Yeah.
That is the role, that is Scrutiny doing its job. So I think that next steps is really important. But we recognise this is a very complicated area with lots of difficult choices. But we are at least making off to a flying start.
I'm also thinking for the input that you've given tonight as well, because I think we've got some good takeaways.
Really helpful, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ken. And we'll now move back to the Ask Court, which we deferred because not all the articles have got managed to business to start.
Definitely not.
You do not, I'm not doing small. But
I'm going to slightly ask the Court Council to come forward first.
Okay.
Because what I've asked them to do, and I hope this is all right with them, to give their impressions on what's happened since we last met and how they feel about, sorry to make it go up.
That's, I don't worry, I'm thinking this will be more some space. Thank you.
Again, I'm very encouraging of people being pushed into the point, but I'd really like, what we would really as a committee welcome your views on what's happened since we last committee about it. So who's going to kick off? Linda. Right. I choose Linda.
Actually, we have all three ward councillors have actually had an opportunity to talk about this in the car. Right. The problem that this sounds great on paper, but doesn't really reflect the lived experience of people in Earl's Court. And so there's still a level of frustration that you get a whole load of recommendations and whether in fact they haven't really felt it. So if we look at supported needs, accommodation and adult social care, and I know that Hamish wants to talk about this as well, we have the consistent problem of nomination, management and outcomes. Now, we realise that several organisation departments are involved in the placement of individuals in some of the supported housing provision in the Earl's Court Board, not just the council. So what we're asking for is an overarching policy of how we address that problem. We don't care whether they're in Look Ahead, Turning Point, St Mungo's, Metropolitan, Thames Valley, or anywhere else. The issue is that we have a saturation. And it's the impact of that saturation that is having an effect on the area. If we have, I think it's just under 50% of the social housing, specialist social housing provision, it's irrelevant as to who nominates them. It's the fact that they're there and whether they have the relevant support when they're there, that they don't have, they recover, that they actually manage to achieve the aims of their progress, or they impact on their lives. But actually what happens is they land up sometimes as part of the street population when they leave their 2-year license. They still have addictions and they still have problems. So the answers in the report are very carefully constructed. I noticed that Turning Point features, but we know that we have 3 lots of Look Ahead, and we know that there are increasing problems coming from different locations with Look Ahead. So I think we really do need to examine the nominations, the management, what do we actually expect? Because actually, I think that look ahead have just become gatekeepers. I don't know whether they're actually care providers. So if we look at the addiction and substance abuse services, in the report it states that 25 community pharmacies. Well, in Earls Court, the distance between Boots, had great fun doing this, Boots and the Earls Court chemist is 42 metres. And the distance between Zaffas, which happens to be in Redcliffe, is 320. So you have 3 pharmacies that are actually delivering the OST, treat therapy, which means that they're servicing the needs of people within our hostels, but they're also delivering from people outside the borough who come. So actually we need a strategy as to how we approach that and actually not police it, but we need to be able to actually deal with the people who are on the street. And I'm very pleased to see about the safe place to rooms, because I think that's good for people with drink or alcohol, drink and drugs, because they prevent them from being made more vulnerable. But we do have this concentration, and this isn't really covered by community wardens, and it's not covered by the DAWT. So housing associations.
So, sorry, I was hoping you were just going to give us an impression of what had changed, and then I thought we are going to go
it's just that there's certain points, and it comes back again and again to nomination. If you have transparency of nomination at the time that you give a tenancy, whether it's to supported social housing or whether it's general needs, you would actually have a far easier management style of the problems. But actually, if you place somebody's vulnerable into general need, are you actually helping them? Because what happens is then they get into a cycle, then they get evicted, and then it comes back to certain key points which I don't see in this document.
I know that some colleagues will have picked those up as well. Hamish, do you want to apply to that?
There are things I wouldn't mind touching on planning.
Well, maybe we can do that as questions
Right.
when we have them done.
Yeah, your permission, Chair, I was going to briefly reflect as well on some of the recommendations. I'll try to tie in what's been happening, and particularly with policing as well. So what I'll do is I'll just briefly touch on policing, housing, planning, and adult social care. Just before I do, I want to thank you for sort of inviting us back to the committee to talk about this again. It has almost exactly been a year since the original presentation. Part of the reason I remember that because Councillor Strawdry suddenly passed away a couple of days later, and it's the anniversary of his death was a couple of days ago. So I'm just paying tribute to him for a Okay, on policing, there has been quite a lot that's positive. I think that's been going on. Certainly, the response to the recommendations, I think, shows a number of initiatives going on, both internally in the council. I know the police have been incredibly supportive as well. They've had a couple of initiatives of their own in response. We've got a few meetings coming up with community safety and the police to delve more into that. So I think that's all positive. It sort of remains to be seen what the longer term strategy could be. I know the 2 action months were quite successful. There was a reduction in incidents, and so it remains to see whether we can secure the additional patrols. And that was the very strong response from residents in various surveys that more visible patrols are needed. And so if we can find ways securing that, and I can see that there's creative approaches that are being tried, and we're supportive of those, I think that would be incredibly positive in the long run, whether it's council wardens, whether it's other types of officers, whether it's private security, whether it's actual police officers as well. I know that's something that's being explored. Additional CCTV, potentially more monitoring, more coordination there. Again, I think it is quite clear that there are various initiatives there. Welcome all of them. Let's see whether they work in practice. And I think it would be good to see some kind of a written longer term strategy as to what the outcome of that council action month was, and we've got a couple of meetings coming up around that. So we're looking forward to that. On housing, I think generally, well, I welcome certainly the responses there. I think the new tenancy strategies and links with the housing associations. Again, let's see how that turns out. But I can see that there's an acknowledgement that some improvements can be done there. On planning, again, I know that the lead member has worked quite a lot in terms of hotels and HMOs to try and get some of the longer term changes in there. I would briefly note the response on studios. I do feel was a little bit disappointing. I think we do understand the housing title pressures and so on, but I think we do still feel, and I certainly do, if we can increase the demographic mix in the area, it would go to considerable lengths to addressing some of those problems. And if there's a question as to what the link is between housing and types of housing and facility behaviour, fundamentally it's about the huge concentration of studios and beds that we have in there. And of course, the more of those you have, the more likely it is that you will have individuals, majority of of course, single individuals who are housed in the area.
Or Airbnb.
Or Airbnbs, of course. So again, whatever can be done about that, I think will be welcome. I know the lead member has been incredibly supportive in trying to find practical solutions on that. I will end on adult social care. I was concerned, I suppose, to say it in that way about the response. And I think that's maybe the area where we could look at a little bit more and would welcome further discussions as to what the next steps might be on that. My impression was from the responses that it was almost as if the current processes, the current systems in place essentially worked well. I may have been wrong. Welcome officers and lead members' views on that. And what I would say is, if that is genuinely the case, that we can't improve management and nominations and everything else, it's as good as it can possibly be, then perhaps we do need to look at whether, and what I would say is we have never asked for those services to be closed down, despite everything else, the concentration, so on. We have no point have we said we want these services shut. It's not the approach we've ever taken. What we've always asked for is, can we improve the management? Can we provide the types of services that these vulnerable people need? But if in fact it is the case that we can't do that, then perhaps we do need to look at alternatives. Perhaps we need to look at secure accommodation in a more appropriate location, for example. I don't know, again, welcome more, whatever it may be. I would welcome further discussion.
So for my end, I'll focus on the policing side of things. I think we're all really pleased with the outcome of the month of action, where we actually, also residents felt the difference. But I think the big question from residents is what happens after that month of action? How is the sustainability of that? Will we be getting extra police officers, etc.? I think we're also really pleased with the return of the OSCORD and the social behaviour meetings. We'll have the first one on Monday, and all three of us will be feeding into that. There are a few things that we had a few questions on that we would love to raise at some stage, such as the outcome of the CBO panels. How successful are they? Do they take the individuals off our streets that are causing most of the hassle? More questions on the initiatives such as the combating drugs partnership and the business crime forum, because the report didn't really provide any details on those concepts. So what is happening on that front? Can we get involved on those ones? And also more details about the award model and when that will take effect, and questions around the principles of that concept, basically. CCTV, how that will work for us, score to see an increase. The other thing was, for us, three of us, we felt that it's a shame that we're losing Sergeant Harry Jones. It's common for police officers to rotate across regions. However, in the case of sport, I think continuity is important to ensure that the progress of this council's call for action is guaranteed. So as the involvement of the police is crucial, we ask for the council to work really as close as possible with the MEP to ensure that the handover does not negatively impact this exercise. And then, yeah, it will be interesting to see how the funding for the policing initiative, funding of the policing initiative will continue in all schools after this.
Good, thank you very, very much. I think you've given officers and lead members and us a really strong flavour of how you feel, what's gone well, what hasn't perhaps progressed as much as you, and some pending questions. Would you mind, Terry, going back to sit there? And I'm going to put the officers up here for interviews. Then I know we've got lots of questions, some of them along the lines of the things you've raised, and then obviously I'll be welcoming you to add any extra questions at the end. We need to make sure the committee gets a chance at the time. We've got a wonderful assortment of bottles, we've got a man here as well. Are you going to
Very briefly, yeah, I mean, it's sort of obviously as I've been asked by this committee, this sort of lead members to be in charge of this piece of work, and it's really I want to initially start obviously by thanking Malcolm and the other council for bringing this forward in the first place, but also a huge amount of thanks to the officers. And it's really been one of the finest pieces of work I've seen on the council in joining up all of our discussions, our conversations, and making sure that the silo working is the phrase that is now ingrained in my mind, is one that we can dispel through a piece of work like this. And as we've seen, we have been able to have some really positive actions. There's obviously a lot of comments there that we need to discuss. Personally, I think Earls Court is a bit of a microcosm of the whole borough. It's obviously, we know it well. There's high density, lots of people, quite transient, busy roads, all sorts of things. And these have their challenges. But I think it's a fabulous part of the borough, and what we really want to do is make sure that we sort of enact these recommendations and come back down the line with some even further progress. And really just a big thank you to everybody. I think there's a lot of support from what's before us.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with Greg.
Thanks very much, Mary, and very much to all councillors for coming and giving your perspectives a year on from when we started it, and the general team for this version of the paper. Several of the recommendations are still works in progress. I can see that, and I think my own point of view, I think as a committee want to see it again. And a couple of just a minor points to start with. There's some conditionality in some of the responses I didn't like very much. So 12, 13 and 16 examples where it says the council can direct, the council can direct. I actually want to know what the council will do, not can do. And there's a couple that need timelines in them. So 17 is an example. I want to know when something's going to be done by, not something so vague. But we're going in the right line, so right direction anyway. The points I'm interested in, I would say some things about 24, but I know Lucy's going to cover that, so I'm going to park that. And I want to talk about 2021 for the planning ones. And I thought Hamish raised them earlier, and Hamish was remarkably restrained in what he said. But I won't be. I've done something that's really good on my notepad. Frankly, I don't accept what's been said here. I understand why your officers would have advised to say that, because we're being governed by planning targets, but I don't accept those targets. They're external build targets. They're made a mockery of by the 5,000 dwellings that we've lost through short-term lettings. So these targets are complete nonsense. So actually, what I'm looking for is assurance that the local, next time the local plan is, in fact, that you will look immediately at a revision to the local plan, because obviously this is an ongoing cycle. I know you can just deposit one local plan to the inspector for approval, but that means that the work gradually starts again on the next version. And I'm looking for an assurance that you'll address these very 2 points on amalgamations and HMOs going forward as a matter of urgency. I mean, HMOs, in my view, are not a fit way of living in the 21st century, and it's completely wrong that we should be protecting HMOs just because we're driven by an artificial target. And likewise, amalgamations, particularly with historic properties that were built as houses, in my view, it's perfectly proper to amalgamate in those circumstances, albeit that you wouldn't want to amalgamate several houses together to create a super mansion. So I'm looking for your assurance that you will look at those points without telling me.
Do you want a man's story?
Yeah, still happening. I'm happy to.
I mean, I'm looking for a man
Appeal
to listen to what
Yeah,
I'm saying, but my direction is that they handle on this.
No, so on the very first points that you made, I agree with you. I think on the can argument, I think that's something code to take away, and I think probably we can strengthen that. We can, so we will. On the wardens, I know Councillor Will was here, she would explain the difficulty in recruiting at the moment, so we are actually going through a review of the entire enforcement piece, really, CREST, as it's known. The intention is to have this dedicated officer within each ward. We might find that actually through sort of combining roles and bringing officers together, we can end up with a slightly larger number per ward, but doing more jobs, if that sort of makes sense. So the intent is definitely to have those boots on the ground. One thing that wasn't involved in this, but will be coming, is obviously around the HMO licensing, which will involve more boots on the ground. On my one-man campaign against the Town and Country Planning Act, there are a number of things that obviously we've debated as our local plans come forward. It's been fully consulted, as you know, with all of our residents. You're absolutely right that there are sort of national targets which are guiding an awful lot of the policy. I think this is exactly why it comes down to sort of local decision makers making decisions. Councillors across the borough who have the right to call in applications that they think are not right for their area. One of the key pieces of how policy is formed is on evidence gathering and evidence basis. So, of course, if you only permit studio apartments and then many studio apartments are built, your evidence suggests you need many more studios. But what we have to try and do is bring forth, encourage developers and encourage the owners to actually trust the system and bring forward the proposals that they want to do rather than what's sort of set down the national policy. HMOs are an interesting one. Obviously, my time as a student, I quite enjoyed living in an HMO. I had all my friends very in close proximity. They do provide a role. The sort of strict protectionism around their use classes is clearly something within planning. I think it's no surprise that I'm quite flexible on some of these things, and I'm quite trusting of the market to decide what is in demand. They do have a role to play, and I think where we're being consistent in Earl's Court is that we are allowing the market to change what's going on there. So we might find that there is a huge demand to convert HMOs into C3 residential. We might find, in fact, that our policy to liberalise hotel conversions doesn't go anywhere. Nobody does that. So I suppose there's a bit of a learning curve for us there. And then if things are positive, they'll be the basis of a new local plan review.
Amanda, did you want to add anything to that? It's Joe masterfully covered it all.
Masterfully, yes, I would agree. My only comment would be thanking Councillor for the question. In response to the comment on housing targets, from an officer perspective, we're duty bound to take into account and be in conformity with the London plan at the moment, and we do recognise that government has given indications as to what may or may not happen in respect of housing targets going forwards. But as we sit here today, at this point in time, from an officer perspective, in consideration of the Town and Country Planning Act, we're duty bound to continue in terms of having being in conformity with the regional plan, which is the London plan, and that sets RPKC's housing targets at the moment.
And may I just made that point, may I just say I completely understand that you're trained as an officer to do your duty in that respect. That's your context. I was having a pop at Dan because I don't think that's acceptable, but I know you've got to do that, but we need to change it, and that's why I was really when you go at Jen, it's only you go at you.
Absolutely fine. That's the way it should be. Lucy, then Kathleen, then Laura.
I just wanted to talk about recommendation 24, so the designating of alcohol as a cumulative impact zone, and just understanding where we have got to with this. as I think it is something that is really important.
Well, there's a sort of no right at the end of a very long spiel, isn't it? It whistles on and then it.
Particularly as I just think it's in terms of licensing and the venues and applications we're having, and quite often our hands are tied. If we did have different circumstances, we wouldn't necessarily be granting licenses. And I just think, can we say that we're making a difference and trying to push this action plan through when we're encouraging late night drinking and with antisocial behaviour and more disturbance in a neighbourhood where people are really suffering? I just think there's an example in this situation, there should be an example that we're setting case by case.
So in other words, you think there's a very strong case?
I think there's a very strong case that this is something
which officers and Jen don't appear to agree with. So we're challenging that.
I'll try and defend my hidden no at the bottom. I think it goes back to Earl's being a bit of a microcosm of the borough and of London. We have large numbers of licensed premises around the borough. I mean, I believe you live in an area that has a huge number, and actually we're not hearing the same sort of issues. So for me, the takeaway really from this suggestion is actually, is it around management of the operations and the operators in the area that are causing the problem? Is there perhaps an issue around gambling and parlours? I think that's something which is a little bit more specific to Earl's Court, but I don't think there's a good justification to say that Earl's Court has more licensed premises causing trouble than other parts of the borough. I think Holville probably has per square mile or square kilometre the largest volume. It's really about making sure that our officers and our licensing conditions are suitable for the premises. I'm happy to continue to keep a good close eye over them, and I'm sure the committee will do so as well. But I fear that a cumulative impact zone is one of those policy tools that many years from now, colleagues will say, liberalise it, remove it, sort it out again. There's interfering in the market is one of those things that the second and third order consequences are very hard to put your finger on. What I really personally believe in is good management and good operation can resolve many of the potential issues. So I'd like to give those a really good going over before we resort to
response, if I may say so, to the one in the paper where you say there's not enough evidence to do it, as opposed to you don't want to do it.
Well, the evidence is based upon the comparisons to the other parts of the borough. So we do have late-night establishments around KNC. Not all of them cause trouble. Some of them have had issues before. They've come before licensing committees and have had their licenses revoked. Those rules remain available to the councillors in Earl's Court. If the licensed premises is in breach of its conditions, it will be dealt with in the exact same way anywhere else would be around the borough. I think the one I would point out, though, is gambling. There is something around the sort of the impact that gambling has, not just on a local area, but also on the public health side of things to people's life. It is an addiction. Of course, alcohol and drugs are also an addiction. But I feel with gambling, we're not Las Vegas. We are a city. Gambling does occur around London, but I'm not sure if it's actually sort of something people think of when they associate Kensington and Chelsea, like they point out.
I suspect this is one that might come back again next time this comes back, but shall we part over? Well, you had a question about sustainability, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. My question is, I can see there's a lot of resources have been put into this project. So how much resources did we put in? And how do we see continuing? I mean,
this is about the blitz here, aren't we?
This result is as a result of intensive application of resources. How can we sustain that result going forward?
I'll ask Stuart to give the exact detail, but obviously the effort that was put in here was at the detriment of the rest of the borough. We pulled resource out of other boards to make sure that they were carrying out actions in Earl's Court. You'll obviously be aware that at the recent budget we announced that we're going to take this model around the whole borough, each area with slightly different issues, but that required funding, and that's why we've worked with my colleague Councillor Doherty to find a mechanism to try and fund this. I think there's been some really good takeaways from this, not least the fact that crime levels have fallen and remained. It's worked in effect. So, if it's working, do more of it, but obviously that costs time, also resource and capacity, to use a sort of officer term. But the actual action I'm going to give to Stuart to sort of break down the numbers.
Thank you. So you'll see in the report the proactive council teams that were involved in this, as well as kind of some of our external providers, drug and alcohol service, and obviously working with police. Main issues which were dealt with by the council were begging, dump bags, disturbance by music, ASB, cycling on pavements, bulky waste, rough sleeping. There was a 39% increase in activities over and above what would be BAU by council teams, and that came at a cost of £10,000 over and above what we would spend. As Jem said, and it is illustrated in the report, crime reduced compared to its trajectory. It also reduced compared to the same time last year. And those reductions, at the time of submitting this report, we only had figures for January. The February figure was 106, so it's still suppressed. And just to give you an example, it was 118 for the same period last year. So there is a suppression as a result of the work of crime, and I'm accepting that's not just crime that we're looking at. It's also antisocial behaviour. We haven't got such a ready-made figure around antisocial behaviour because it's reported to so many different locations, but it has pushed down the crime figures. So I hope that goes somewhere to answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chair. Page 22, 14. Palestinian Warden and Community Stability. It shows that there is arrest and eviction in prison. I always have a worries, and the people who are black and ethnic minorities, they are a victim of suspicion. So how can we identify or make sure the person arrested or put in conviction is the right person? How can you identify this?
Sorry, please.
Yeah, so the strong sense you'll get from the work that we've done since we last came in July was around collaboration and joining up, not just across the council, but also with our police colleagues. The multi-agency, the ASB Crime Forum, which will be at both ASB and Crime, that we will, this meeting next week, Monday, for the first time. That's the locus for these conversations, and we'll continue to have these conversations. My colleague Rachel Merriman, who's on the call here, is leading that process and has offered to discuss with the ward councillors what they want out of that. But I think through that forum and the shape of that forum, that will go some way to that should pick up the concerns that you right there and be able to respond to.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's remarkable to see most of the relevant lead members working on this issue. And I remember when councillors, Councillor sadly passed away, Malcolm and as well as Linda and Henry were brought some time ago, and really vibrant debate about what needs to be done. So the outcome of that, thanking officers for really taking the lead and making sure that we get to somewhere. And I hope this will be a replicate for other, as the lead member mentioned, for other wards necessarily, not specifically having same issues. My issues were really 2 points, but if I just summarize to the page 22, 15 and 16, relevant to what Councillor Issa said. I understand the police will identify and they will have their own formulas, but will there be a way for the police, as well as the senior officers and the lead members and the local councillors to work on this issue? Because the effect of having local councillors raise and be in the decision-making table, or at least have input, will be necessary. Will that be a way forward to have more input from the local councillors?
Absolutely. So there's 2 ways in which that will happen. That will happen via the ASB and crime meeting, which will be set up. There's also the police ward panels, to which councillors are welcome. That's where residents set the priorities for policing for the borough. But certainly, continued engagement. We really value the feedback from ward councillors. And as I say, Rachel, who's setting up the ASB forum, has reached out to the ward councillors to ask them to have a conversation about what they want to get out of this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just follow up questions? Thank you. And obviously, I haven't mentioned councillor Tim for the last meeting that I attended, the one before I was not there. I also like to mention the page 22, sorry, page 21 on 8. In fact, sensitive it's a policy of letting policy, and I think that's relatively cordial and very smooth. I understand the new policy is coming up for the tenancy letting. Can you give us a bit more details? And in a way, similar issue, will you be working with the local councillors? Because anyone who moves into that area, they will be seeking support, whether it's coming from housing or coming from adult social care, directly have input. Would that affect what's happening locally?
Yes, so we are in the process of devising our tenancy strategy. As mentioned, we are currently consulting with the RPs and things, as you know, it was independent. So we built up that relationship already, and we already alerted them to the fact that some of these items are going to be coming their way. So in answer to your question, yes, we are going to be liaising with the RPs and to be engaging with the council as well. This will going to be part of the consultation.
Very much. Sorry.
Thank you. I work in this paper as well, but I do sense that there is a culture here, a little bit of eyeballing the Marshall Street one size fits all bulldozer. And I'm very sceptical about some of the stuff in the local plan, as I was in the previous division of the local plan as well. I'm old enough to remember the flats and issues across London were on a bed space basis. They were measured on a square foot basis, and now we're on a unit basis. And one thing's missing from the strategy that's coming to us, and I think we should put it as a system, is to say that it's about people. 5 people in a family are considered less value housed than 5 people individually housed as individuals. And that is completely unequitable and breaks into all sorts of areas of vulnerability, age, and so on across the borough. So I think there are good grounds. And there's a shining example that everyone knows well about. Sutton Dwellings are amalgamating some of their smaller units into larger units, and they're being built at the moment by housing associations. So we have a practical working example in the borough improving the social fabric of the area to the great success. And I pay tribute to local colleague there, Kim, for fighting that fight. So I think it's really good program. Should we be looking, 3 quick questions. Should we be looking at a 3-year running program? Context in our sport, because you've got a problem that's going to go away. I do understand there are issues in other parts of the borough, and that there should be KPI milestones within the 3-year rolling plan. It may have to be recalibrated every year. It should include measurement of performance and involvement by the police and national government, particularly with regard to mental health. The other question is the actual cover. Could we also perhaps, Jen, redesignate the cumulative impact zone, type it cumulative management zone? That might solve some of your integration problems with that.
Yeah, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, on the first place, I agree with you. And as I say, we are a planning committee. We have a planning committee made up of Kensington and Chelsea residents and different political parties. It's really up to them to see that the applications, whether they're approved or refused. Officers will do what is required through the national frameworks, and obviously they will make a recommendation. But every councillor has the right to call in to bring applications to a committee. So I recommend that people do look to that and work with some of these developers within your areas to really explain what it is you'd like to see in your neck of the woods. We're trying sort of a macro approach through Earls Court, and we've got designations around SW5. What I really want to see is that it works and that we can then bring it to the rest of the borough. And obviously, we're still talking about studio into 1 bedroom, those sorts of things. I think we need a much clearer policy around from a historic standpoint, bringing homes back into their original form. But then on a family point, as to exactly how do we weigh that balance in planning terms as to a family home for 5 or 5 units for 5. We need to be able to make sure that both can be acceptable by this council. On the 3-year programme, I've got no particular objection to that. I think some of the recommendations are things which actually do apply borough-wide. So perhaps it would make sense to see which ones are really designated for Earls Court and which ones are just good practice for the whole borough. Obviously, we've learned from the action months that we are now doing it for the whole borough. So things around local plans, all of those things are clearly beyond Earls Court. But I'm happy to take some advice as how we might do that for the next few years. And on the cumulative management area, was it the terminology? Yes, I think it is worth us looking at how, there's clearly, this has been raised by the local councillors. We have to address it. As I said, I want to make sure that we're addressing it through the powers we already have, rather than using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. But if the sledgehammer needs to be wielded, I'm not scared to get it out.
Maybe just very brief supplement is that normally licensing and planning, in one respect, you can actually go back on what you committed. But actually, if you put the right conditions in and see things not going to actually withdraw a license, it's very publicly. It might be a useful lesson.
Sarah, would you like to add anything? Just because I know that Linda raised some issues around sort of management and so on, which we haven't really addressed. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I think with some of the issues being raised, some of this is actually health, and I think it's highlighted the need for us all to work together much more than we've been doing before. So, I mean, it's been highlighted with, the mental health plan, which we're working on at the moment, that involves the police, housing, the CCG, CNWL. It goes across the council actually. So I think that's really highlighted that we've got to do more. So that is work in progress. But I think there's a few other things that have been done. The doors outreach has been increased. The drug partnership that's been set up.
And is that sustainable? That increase in outreach?
Yeah, so in light of the work that's done through the project, Turning Point in its guise as the provider of alcohol and substance misuse services has been undertaking weekly outreach within the wall active team to see an increase in the number of people into treating treatment. It's not fixed the problem, but as with the crime figures that Stuart shared, it's more than pretty. The other thing that we are working with Turning Point to help them do is make sure that their outreach also includes in-reach to some of the schemes. So particularly the homeless hospitals where providers identify people who might have a problem benefit from accessing the service to the public.
Thank you. Can I, in the absence of any other, so do you want to ask another question?
Yes, I will say something. It is about antisocial behavior and Iowa. So in House Square Gardens, they establish, council establish a basketball court. The people in Bow Square, they cannot, work at home, or they cannot rest because always there is noise and nuisance. And if they say something is antisocial behavior, they try to complain and raise many times. It is a small residential area, and there's many places where, basketball and sports, facilities are there. And this small area is not suitable. It can be a garden for children and dogs and this, but it's not suitable for the basketball or sports. And people are complaining and suffering. That any plan, to take this in consideration, because instead of we talk Earls Court,
it's a long-running issue, isn't it? So probably not pertaining to Earls Court, but something that I'm sure Stuart or someone would be happy to carry on having a conversation with you about, maybe outside the. Do you want to say anything now? Or?
I know, but I'm aware that there's a long running concern around the basketball court, and there's different opinions around basketball.
Some members of the community are all for it, and some are all against it. Okay, thank you. Can I invite Earls Court councillors to add or cover or ask any questions that we failed you on as a committee? Do you want to come in or are you happy to ask from there? Linda, I'm looking to you as the ring leader.
I think about planning. I think planning actually does play a very important role. So, for example, the granting of adult gaming shop in Earl's Court, there was almost the presumption that they would get a license afterwards. So it was quite interesting at a recent licensing thing where it said Earl's Court, the only sex shop in the borough. Then it said out of 3 adult gaming shops, he had 2. How many massage parlours? And it built up a picture of a high street that actually, do you really want to buy into as a business? Do you want to really invest in it? And then you actually think of, is this a high street that residents actually responding to existing residents and what they want to buy on the high street? So it's a kind of like a domino effect. It's developed over the years. It's kind of layers and layers and layers over the years. And I think it was the pandemic, and that actually revealed everything. And that is the reason why residents got so upset. So when Mary-Therese raised the issue about, I think that she referred to it as a cumulative impact, I referred to it as saturation. We all know that there's a problem. It's a question of, there's going to be multiple ways of actually addressing it. So if I refer to nominations, that is one way. If you nominate a person that doesn't work in a housing association property, and because they've come from supported housing, there should be a fast-track method of returning them to supported housing rather than them being evicted, which is what is happening. So that's one method of addressing a problem, because it reduces the tension. If we're nominating people to housing association properties, are they fit for habitation? That is our responsibility. We're nominating for the Common Housing Register. Is it appropriate that we've got accommodation that's 17 square meters, which probably will be used as Airbnb rather than homes? So there are a lot of different factors that can be put into it, and everybody can do their little bit. We can't rely on Tim Davis to do everything. So, do you know what I mean? That everybody, so, you know, we've got, for example, we've got another licensing application that's going to be coming up for a cocktail bar, which, but they've got to go for change of use. So it comes back to how many licensed premises do you really need in the smallest ward in the country? It's, you know, I think there's proportionality. Is it reflecting the need of the residents that live? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel that what is being proposed is going to be delivered? Do they understand what's going to be delivered?
Linda, thank you very much. I think that's given us a good sort of counter-round. Sorry,
just a thought point. We would appreciate a follow-up with adult social care just to understand a bit more about what the extent of the review is. I think Councillor Vandenbroek's absolutely correct. The relation with health is incredibly important. I think maybe we also feel it's been a bit of a missing link. I think we should dig into exactly what's happening. I think that's very well. But yes, I'll follow up just to understand more about what is happening and what you think can be done in various areas. That remains, so for my perspective, yeah. So still understand.
Ken, you want to
I appreciate what you're saying, Jim, about management of businesses in the area. That might make sense for the borough in itself, but I think local residents will struggle with that a little bit, especially with the amount of adult gaming places, etc., and the problems that come with it on back of that.
Well, I think kind of wide-ranging discussions. I need to pull it to a close, and I really want to thank. We've had so many officers here, reflecting a really joint effort. So I want to thank everybody for coming. And if I can just say that I think this paper wants to come back again. I think there's a very strong message from this committee. I mean, we don't want to kind of go endlessly over it, but I think there are some, we feel there's a bit of unfinished business here, and also a desire to see, your successes built on, let's hope. So we'd like to come back. I would like that paper when it comes back.
If I could just suggest something, would it be helpful if we asked Health to come?
Yes, I was going to add that in. I think it would help to have Health when we come back in. I also think it would be really helpful to sort of divide some of these questions into less. You brought up this point, about lessons that we've learned from this that are applicable to the wider borough, and things that continue to be specific Earls Court ward problems and how we carry on dealing with them, and lessons that we've learned as we've gone along. I think as a general view, I picked this up as well as Greg, that some of the answers were a bit slippery and conditional looking. And I really would like to, when I particularly that question, I had to read right to the end before I realised, in fact, the last question, actually, I put so, no, question mark, or exclamation mark, because there was a lot of verbiage and basically saying no to it, actually for very good reasons, probably not over medicalising things, but just let me say so. We're grown up enough around this table to take that, and so we'd like to see a bit crisper, more honest, not honest, but more straightforward answers. I think the cumulative impact zone is not going to go away. Management isn't necessarily the answer, because cumulative impact zone has a specific meaning and has specific ramifications, and I think it's clear that Earls Court councillors and perhaps some of us around the table think we need to keep an eye on that still. Obviously, the sustainability issue, congratulations for getting more funds for doing what I think seemed to be a very successful part of this process, the sort of more the blitz approach to things, and we'd like to see how that gets on. There was an idea that we need to look at this over a longer period of 3 years, and clearly gambling is an issue which wasn't particularly picked up in the original paper, but transpires as something that people think is important. So thank you very much to the committee, to Earls Court councillors particularly, and to all the officers members who got changed on that. So now I was going to suggest that we pop over to the paper on the FM procurement, because we've got more officers here for that, otherwise go away. Is that fair enough? No, we've got social here. There you go. And then you could go away. But you need to stay here. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, that's fine.
Everything else is permissible, so we should do that.
Just remind you, this is the.
So, can I just remind everybody that there is a part B bit, which we shouldn't specify without going into private sector. I think we've already sort of, and what it did was give us an idea of quantum and so on, and we don't necessarily need to go into private sector. That doesn't mean we can't if any of you feel strongly about it. But can we, I'm going to assume we're not going to go into private session unless I'm told otherwise by the committee. So, I want to introduce this. Very important paper.
Well, I've seen you read it, and we are only a couple of time for questions rather than us speaking with you. Essentially, it's a proposal to commence procurements. We have a contract at the moment which provides what we describe as soft and hard FM, which is really unhelpful, I know. But actually, hard FM is the kind of management of the buildings, the bricks and mortar, where soft FM, which to my service, is more about how you keep those as places that can be used for works and cleaning, security, etc. At the moment, both of those services are provided by an external contractor. That term comes to an end in April 2024. It will be we want to make sure we go to procurement thoroughly, review our requirements, and engage the market fully. So we're looking for permission to start that procurement exercise.
Thank you. Anna, do you want to
Just the service was within the Customer Services Directorate. until about 18 months ago, and then the service was split so that because my function covers property, it was felt logical that the management and maintenance of that property should be within my directorate. That is why it's kind of a double act at this moment in time.
Double act, Matt. All right, who wants to kick off? Greg.
Thanks very much. So there's a couple of minor points and observations. I think, and maybe this would be something you would do in the Part B, but I would want to see the risk set out in a table and plotted on a likelihood and impact if I was doing a project. So that's an observation. Second observation, at 1310, this is a timeline for the. Let's get that up. And just having done a few of these sorts of things when I was in the MOD, the 10-week tender process one, there's an awful lot of activities in that one, and my sort of gut feel looking at that was a bit optimistic. 10 weeks, but Bowen's come back to me on that. But my question is at paragraph 1.8 of the main report, where you seem to indicate you understand the benefits of having a longer contract, certainly longer than the current one, to achieve best value. But I'm wondering why you're not thinking about an even longer one than the one we're proposing. You're proposing 5 plus 2 year extensions. Why not sort of 2 council terms with an 8 year plus a 1 year extension to get better value? And it'd be quite an attractive proposition for bidders other than to do that.
So thank you very much for the recommendation around the risk table, which I think we will take you on and prepare. So previous to me working at RBKC, I actually worked for a contractor in the private sector, and I'm quite so I'm very keen that we move further from 3 years to 5 years, because exactly what you're saying. There is I believe, a tipping point after between 5 and 8 years where you run a risk of complacency, and also from a value perspective, I think you lose the opportunity to continually deliver innovation and continuous improvement after a period. I think it's worth continuing to test that, because the next stage of the procurement is to develop the procurement strategy, and that will have the specific risk table in, but it will also actually test out and evaluate the 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, etc., so that we can actually make sure that we're at the optimum length of time before it reaches that tipping point where complacency potentially, or the innovation falls down. Because yes, you've got quantum of value, but if you can't continue to drive improvement and efficiency throughout the life of the contract, it becomes less value, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make that point that actually what we're going to get is some support and some external expertise to help market testing exercise. And that would be one of the questions we want to explore. You'll notice the report says that we want to put options in the procurement strategy for the members. And I would fully expect it to be an informed decision to be taken on risk versus the reward on a longer term, the contract as part of that process. So we need to test that as market. But at this stage, I guess we just wanted to signal that the 3 plus 2 years just isn't going to give us enough value for the procurement, the investment in procurement exercise.
So the options are still open in terms of the overall length and the extent with which that time.
And I think, we at this point we're from a soft market testing perspective, we would want to borrow with pride and look at what other people are doing in terms of that value generation as well. From a tender process and the timetable point, yes, there is a lot of work to do in 10 weeks, but we also know that the mobilisation period can potentially be flexed. It's currently down as 8 weeks, but we recognise, it will be happening after New Year. So there is a bit of flex in that end, but we have already started with the specification development as well. So that's
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you again for staying a bit longer. Officers. Speaking of long-term, I absolutely understand having a long-term contract. That's give us the benefit of not only security but sustainability as well. Without changing, moving from one to another system, it goes down. Option 1, we have here page 74, 7.10. Option 1 and option 2. I'm mainly concentrating about option 2. I know at one point it says we do not have the disadvantage that this may not be economically viable at 7.20. So I would like to know, is there any chance we can do a split? Obviously, we cannot do in-house. We have to have outsourcing to get expertise in and some not reinventing the wheel or creating a database on our own. Is there any way concentrating locally so that we can have insourcing some of the work? So that we can actually get more people to be trained locally and offer them the jobs Kensington just residents.
Yeah, absolutely. So we already have a mixed model where some of our functions are delivered internally through directly with staff, and some are delivered externally. And as part of our market testing, what we like to understand is where the market has moved to in terms of commodification. So actually, it's it makes more sense in Anna's area, and I'll speak over her area. She's better placed than me to do so, but there are some services that you just, it would be so expensive to retain the internal expertise for something you use very rarely on building services. So there are some things that it just makes absolutely no sense at all to have in-house. But some of our services on the soft side, we would be looking at whether we could, whether delivering those in-house was a better model. So, for example, we already have reception, front of house in-house. One of the things I want to look at is whether actually the direct management of the security and cleaning officers should be brought back in-house. It's unlikely that we would end up in a place where it makes financial sense to bring in-house some of the provision, but we will check that carefully. I think what we could tell from our research was a blanket in-sourcing of everything is not going to work. But we do have a mixed model at the moment, and I think we'd look to retain that wherever it made sense to do so.
And I think flipping back to social investment, one of the strands of social investment is around procurement and ensuring that we not only deliver our statutory social value requirements, yes, but also that we, ask the whoever is the contractor to deliver above and beyond. And one of the things I'm quite keen to do is around apprentices that are local within the borough, so that they can actually be brought on at different roles, not just engineering or electricians or carpentry, but in the management function. So then they can learn, progress and go through. And it's not just about an apprentice, it's about apprentice moving to a full-time job as well, so that we don't have that cut off on really.
So question, if you don't mind, Chair, a quick one. You've actually answered my second question, which I'm pleased to say. However, will that be in the category of choosing the contractor? Yes. Well, if it's that in the documents or in the contract, then they cannot say. Everyone can say good words, but later when they land on the contract, they can change their mind. Will that be category part of the contract?
So,
or will you do that now?
No. So we will be in terms of evaluation of the contract. There will be it will be a percentage versus it will be cost versus quality, and we will agree the percentages of that, because what we don't want to do is put 80% on cost and nothing on quality. Within the quality, there will be technical requirements that they have to meet, and there will also be categories related to environmental sustainability, social value, and the added value they can give, and the costs will be how much is an apple and a pear be. So, and those will be weighted as well.
Any other questions? I've just got sorry.
Yeah, you look at the two
I never
questions.
go from
First of all, I just want to I'd say that I understand the sense of soft and hard and split, so that's not a strange thing. I think one's customer oriented, one's manual. How do you measure progress? How do you actually know statutory functions have been done, especially in view of the previous contractual experience? I'm not talking about experience with this contract, about contractual law.
Yeah.
And the measure was 98%, and the actual on audit was 100%.
So for the statutory compliance comes under my remit, but we do get oversight from our corporate health and safety, which is under safety. So we report our performance on statutory compliance on a monthly basis, and that is two elements of statutory compliance. One is the statutory compliance delivered by our contractor, and the second is statutory compliance that is delivered by other contractors who are specialists, such as asbestos, fire safety, and also our internal responsibilities, such as fire evacuation plans, premises controls, etc. And that data is reported on a monthly basis, and it's reported to my senior management team above me on a quarterly basis, and it is also being reported to committee at their request, like the general performance for housing and social investment. We've also requested that our internal audit do a fact check and an internal audit of our compliance, both on our commercial estate and our operational estate. Commercial estate, the responsibility rests with the tenant of those properties, commercial properties. The report from internal audit came back as satisfactory. We only had 2 areas of limited assurance, but there was no areas of high risk at all. So what we also are doing as part of the procurement is an external test by our consultant on our statutory compliance and the testing. And we have actually also, when we're looking at contractors who deliver some areas of compliance that is outside of the main remit, we actually quality check against contractors that are delivering in our residential properties on our housing sites. So we're making sure that we're following the same regulations, etc.
Second question is, how do we check cumulative maintained condition is aligned with large ticket capital?
So quite an interesting question, because that's exactly what I asked when I took over the function. What we've done over the last 18 months is we have had a specific officer appointed who has been actually checking. So checking our planned repairs, checking the general repairs, to not only quality check what our contractor is telling us, but also to feed that data into our investment planning. So we actually are going to be more proactive on our capital investment, so that we look to replace before something fails and it becomes an emergency. And that is about using the data we've got on our general repairs and maintenance, so that it's I call it a 3 strikes and you're out game. So if an element has failed the same failure 3 times, that means there is a problem with it. If there's 3 different failures, then we can investigate, but we need to actually be more proactive. So because it is more cost effective spending capital monies than it is high cost revenue. So what we've done over the last 18 months is compile that data, because we know when we're procuring a new contract, the better the data that is incorporated in history, the less risk less risk will be priced in the tenders.
And will you capitalise officer time on capital?
We do. My capital team is capitalised rate projects, but with recent SIPFA guidance, it has to be, rather than it's a capital project, it has to be a specific named operational building or operational project, if you like. It's not how it used to be, where you just go, it's specifically related to that project. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. This is, at early stage. I suppose I had one question, which is, it seems to be that you're either going to contract the 2 services together or 2 separately. There is a model where you can do both. You can say to the contractors, you can also bid to do both, and show us what you do with that, which I would think is worth, I would just add that's worth considering.
Yeah.
Also, when you talk about developing the specification, this is just kind of from horrible experience.
Yes.
What we're not really emphasising particularly here is the importance of the inventory as part of the a specification, and actually making sure you've nailed down every bit of kit, because the thing that gets really expensive is when you've forgotten bits and then they price them afterwards.
Yeah.
And I've known experiences where we've actually forgotten a whole actual service of a whole reception desk and stuff, and it's quite possible to do because you don't see what's in. So all I would say is I'm just encouraging you to use this time to really nail down, and it wasn't, I'm sure you meant it, but it just wasn't particularly expressed in here.
Yeah.
So I think Greg's raised the issue of risks and the length of the contract. I mean, none of these are sort of things that we're suggesting in a hard and fast rule, but just things that we think should be thrown into the pot to consider. And I think we're reassured that we're going to rigorously examine what the mix of internal and external provision is, and because that's very important that we get best value, but also that we do think about what bits we could bring in house. I think we were quite happy to bring the front reception in house. And that we've got a different feel about it, and so it's appropriate for that, but it isn't appropriate for those things that we can't, any of some lit mechanics and stuff on the board. So thank you very, very much for bringing this so early, and it's good to have an opportunity to look at it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. Okay. Right, we've got a couple of papers left there in time. So,
one of which we can't do anything about it. One of which you can't actually do.
One of which we can't do, yes. We still haven't got the tracker. Have you? It's quite hard to work.
For the next one.
With the glitch, we're using the tracker, which is why you haven't got it, obviously. But you have had the emails when the key decisions have been on the board plan and the reports have been circulated. But I appreciate for the committee planning its work, looking ahead, you must have that document.
Can I raise one point on that? One of the key decisions that was put around was about the work that's going to happen on scoping the next few years' work on the Brentford. And Mary and I wrote to the officers concerned and asked them as to if they could give a bit more detail in the description on the definition of community, because one of the things I was concerned about is that some of the Brentford bereavement survivors have moved to live geographically outside the very local area around Brentford to make sure that they were going to be included in that consultation. Officers give reassurance that they'll be bringing this paper back later in the year and we can examine it.
Anyone else got any other comments?
Have we got an assurance for us that we are going to get it? Because I've been on this committee for I think 3 years and I've never seen it until the last 2 meetings when we haven't had it.
Yeah, there has been a glitch. There's been some changes. I will speak to colleagues.
What I don't quite understand is that we told them that we'd like it at the last minute, and how long does it take to cobble together? That's what I really don't understand.
No, I mean it's a straightforward document.
Yes, which presumably is on the stocks and added to.
Which officers do you have?
Well, I don't think we need to name them.
No, I don't think government. Could we
So we're sending a firm message back.
can we have a reply from governments to that question?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Even if they can't do the traffic.
Shall we pick up agenda item 7, which is our work programme? I've asked if this could include a list of the working groups that they go on. And I'm not sure we've got enough working groups today, but I'm going to revisit that separately. And that maybe the format of this report could be tidied up, because I think the table makes it overly long.
Yeah, well, the idea of having the tables is that this committee is responsible for the work programme in its entirety. So that's what you can see.
Yeah, I just mentioned.
But yes, the format is interesting. I shall.
It makes it look longer than it actually is.
Yeah, so I'll have a look at that. And the Scrutiny Committee's scrutiny function will be looking at its work programme, starting to develop it. Usually that happens after the AGM in May. So I will commission some reports to assist you with that around policies and projects coming up. Look at the risk register. You yourselves as councillors will have your own ideas. You'll also be talking to your residents and your wards for ideas. So I will collate all of that together, and then it's how you want to manage that process. So in the past we've had the workshop where councillors have discussed suggestions and they feed into the select committees to come here.
We think it's worth putting something, maybe at the annual meeting, putting something around every councillor's seat to suggesting. It's because it's the kind of the beginning of the term, isn't it? Yeah. Suggesting, have you got any suggestions for scrutiny, even if you're not on that committee, please.
Yeah, if I could. One of the things that came out of the that those of you who read the budget working group, which was published at least twice in the last council meeting papers, which is quite extraordinary. But one of the recommendations from that is that we should look at our working group. And I'm doing some work with Jackie and Lisa Taylor initially, and then with Mary, and then we'll bring it to you guys as well. Some lessons learned from this last year. Put in simple terms, budget working group started effectively in August, having decided what it was going to do, and produced its report under an enormous amount of pressure on officers during the budget making in February. Between February of last year, when the report was produced, and August, Putin invaded Ukraine, and the world went crazy with regard to a whole lot of things that affected the budget. And no work has been done about budget working group. One of the major suggestions we're looking at is how we can actually make it a monitor in 4 times. Use the full year. And I think that's a lesson that all select committees might reflect on, rather than using 6 months of it.
So could I just raise, Councillor Hammond might want to raise that conference?
Yeah, probably worth saying is we do have a second working group, Sydney and myself, on your behalf, Mary, leading the conference on that social behaviour annual discharge of duties, the statutory duty to scrutinise crime and disorder in the borough. So it's the 28th in Small Hall, 6:30 for a couple of hours to listen to residents.